Their meeting, it's on a
potential
Wednesday.
proposal for us.
Perfect, thank you.
But we would talk about a case.
Yeah, we'd like to have Charlotte Day. Mark was turning on information.
About the, what? SHARL. That's the incident to jail. What's this one?
Yes. So the criminal got convicted and then.
It's Terry.
Thank you.
Okay. So I'm going to call the meeting to order. We have a forum tonight. And we'll start out with... Okay. We'll run through the agenda. Because we have a couple we but we'll start out with public comments, and then we'll go to commissioners' comments and responses. We'll approve July's minutes, and then we were supposed to have Mayor-elect Lucy Venice join us tonight, but she cannot make it. She is asked to join us at our next meeting on November 9th, the joint meeting with CRB. So we will add her to that agenda. So tonight's agenda everything will get moved up a little bit on it. We're going to do policy 702, searches and inventory of detained persons, policy 703, storage of person's property. We'll take a very short break, and then we'll talk about medical aid to suspect. And that policy, Sergeant Williams passed out. There should be some copies on the table back there. Make sure everybody has a copy of that so we can talk about it. And then we'll talk about the joint CRB commission meeting next month, look for topics, and then everyday concerns and emerging issues. We want to discuss those, and then we get the chief's report, and then we'll have closing comments. Before we get started tonight, we have the new person at the table who is replacing Jed McGuire from the police union. And Chief, would you like to introduce?
Yeah. Hey, Chris.
Hi.
Officer Chris Mackey is a member of the Eugene Police Association, our police union, and he's been with our department since 2011. Pretty respected. In a short time, he's become a pretty respected member of the organization. He's born and raised in Eugene, and attended Sheldon High School and went to San Jose State University on a soccer scholarship, and you coached at the University of Oregon too.
Yeah.
And he's on the SWAT team. He's also, in addition to being a member of the EPEA, he's one of our background investigators, pretty important position in the department. In 2015, he was the Lane County Officer of the Year when he received a crisis intervention award from NAMI, National Alliance for the Mentally Ill, and he's had a stellar career since he's been here. So I'm glad he can be at the table with us.
Great. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks. Thanks, glad to be here.
So we will go to public comments, and Edward couldn't make it tonight, so I've asked Scott to do the public comment section. So turn it over to you.
Great. So those that want to make public comments, we have some blue forms back on the table back there. You'll have 3 minutes. I'll raise the sign up when you have 20 seconds remaining, and then also flip it over when your time's up. So go ahead and get started with Jessica. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jessica C. Screen with They Can Be Together. I want to say something about the topic tonight about the searches and inventory of detained persons and storage of prisoner property, just about process and community involvement. And I think back about what it would have been like if Carol Bird Caldwell was still coming to these meetings and making public comments. But she's not, so in a way I'll try to channel the kind of things that she would say, but this is also, I'll say it my way, you know, what I would say about it. I think these are policies that there's a lot of feeling in the community, the homeless community and homeless advocate community, that whatever policies there are not being always enforced the way they're supposed to be. And that that even when there's a sense that there ought to be a complaint made about a certain thing that an officer has done, it's very rarely that a complaint is made in those situations. And then when a complaint is made to the auditor's office, it's very rarely that they're handled there in such a way that really can dig down in the way that the community needs on these issues. And so the gist of what I'm going to say, and I'll probably run out of time, is that I hope that you do, a good review tonight, and I hope that you don't finish this item tonight and make a recommendation on it tonight. I ask you to wait till a later meeting to do that, so that more people can be encouraged to watch the video of your review about the policy, so that then more people have a chance to make some comments before you make your final recommendations. And if the chief's little advisory group on homelessness hasn't looked at this yet, I think it could be a good thing to try to do some outreach to those folks about too before either one of these policies is finalized in your recommendation. And the civilian, to say a little bit more about the auditor's office role in all this, the Civilian Review Board, Steve's surely going to tell about the case that they reviewed the other night. It was a service complaint, and it was about homeless people. And several people on the CRB said they didn't know why this was chosen to be one of the cases for them to review. And Carol and I would have said the same thing, except that we have noticed over the years that the cases that the auditor's office chooses for review often are not the ones to really help the community be able to dig into these things going on. But the auditor's office, surely the CRB won't review another one of these for about a year. So therefore, don't say it's just up to the CRB to police that end of things. Thank you.
Next speaker is Jack Rady.
Good evening. I'd like to welcome our soccer coach to the table here. That's good news.
Thanks.
I'd like to start off by complimenting the chief and the department for what I read in the paper about setting up teams to patrol the downtown area involving both behavioral health professionals, social workers, and officers. I hope this is a smashing success, and I hope it is judged as smashing success and is a model for future things. It's a very positive sign. I'm very glad to see it. That'll do it for the positive stuff, you know me. The case of ex-officer Charlo, I would like to speak about, where an officer committed an assault in the jail, grabbing a handcuffed man by the throat, throwing him on the cement floor, putting a foot on his head. The DA chose to prosecute it as a misdemeanor. If it had been me, I suspect it would have been a felony, or any of you, those of you not in uniform. The officer spent 15 months on paid leave and then resigned his post. He was sentenced to 60 days in jail, suspended. Shortly thereafter, I read about another man committed an assault in the jail, spitting in the eye of a sheriff. He went up on a felony for several years, and that sounded entirely appropriate. He sounded like a real piece of work. But in the Charlo case, there were 3 other officers who stood there and watched him commit an assault. I don't think it was subtle. I don't think one would need to really think deeply. Well, was that legal? Was that not legal? Grabbing a man by the handcuffed man by the throat, throwing him on the ground, stepping on his head, doesn't look right. And I would hope that our law enforcement officers say, law has been broken. I must enforce that law. Do something. Or at least seeing that the officer was very upset, say, excuse me, let me handle this one. You see, why don't you just take a few breaths? We can handle this. That didn't happen. I don't know if the officers came forward and provided evidence of the assault. I do not know. I do know that the court case came up once the video was reviewed, and it was discovered that, contrary to what the officer had said, there had been an assault. We want to know what is being done for the 3 officers whose duty was to enforce the law and did not. Then there's the case of a certain sergeant on the force who was involved in a case that you're going to be discussing probably about the Civilian Review Board. Not the first time he has gotten into trouble around the use of violence. And I'm just concerned that he's still a sergeant and that this doesn't seem to be a problem that is being dealt with. Thank you.
Joe Tyndall.
Okay, well, guess we got the answer to that question again. Okay, so one of the things that I did, I handed these to the city council. There you go, send some more down this way. This is that survey that was done by the police commission about 3 years ago of the rank and file officers. That was never actually written up and delivered. And 2 years ago, when the committee made its, the commission made its report to the city council, Councilman Pryor basically got quite irate about the fact that this had not been written up, but then it didn't get written up again. It's very interesting. I find it's definitely worth reading. What I've done is I've sorted out the responses by question. And so I would hope you would read it, and I will bring the subject back up again, not next month because you have the joint meeting, but the following month I will bring this back up. There's a lot of things in here. For example, when I was on the commission, we went through a number of times my suggesting that shorter, more clearly worded policies would be better. You'll find a number of officers commenting on that kind of thing. There's other things in here that I think are very illuminating, and I would hope that you would actually read this. Second thing is we have the man out the door who basically chose to censor speech. And so I think there's 2 things I would like to see. First is those censorship rules, which are innocuously worded, removed. It's not appropriate to censor anything that might make someone feel uncomfortable. That's a little vague and quite malleable among the other things written on that page. And I find the entire affront to the First Amendment to be disgusting. I think that Bob should resign as a result of having chosen to do that after a period of actively working to silence me on this committee. Regarding the things that we'll be talking about, or you'll be talking about this evening, there are some comments in here that are relevant, for example, to the search and inventory thing on the part that the officers made. And I guess I do raise my question about the medical issue, medical attention. Does that apply to people injured by the police? Certainly we had something from one of the other speakers tonight, so it's not just me complaining about that particular thing. So I want to thank you, and I'll see you guys next month.
Thank you. Davey Jackson.
Good evening. My name is Davey Jackson. I'm here tonight because of the extremely volatile and polarizing national discussion regarding police use of force and racial bias. As a citizen who is a person of color, I'm very concerned that outdated, improper, and in some cases unconstitutional practices have become deeply embedded in law enforcement agencies around our country. Baltimore, Cincinnati, Ferguson, and just this week, San Francisco joined a growing list of major cities the federal government has found to have violated minority citizens' civil rights. As with many Americans, I was deeply disturbed by the video shooting death of Terrence Kutcher in Tulsa. Body camera and helicopter footage shows an out-of-sorts Mr. Kutcher with his hands in the air shortly before being fatally shot. This video has emboldened advocates for police reform who set off an internet firestorm in the days directly after the shooting. It has also raised the level of anxiety that African Americans and other minorities have interacting with law enforcement because they feel the same thing could happen to them. Earlier this week, the Chicago Police Department made a press announcement about their proposed changes to CPD's use of force guidelines. Among the changes, these guidelines have new emphasis being placed on the sanctity of life, requiring officers to act with foremost regard for human life and safety of all persons. This includes offering medical aid to those injured in use of force incidents. While I applaud the proposed changes, I am appalled that the duty to render aid is only now being added to the Chicago Police Department's policies. I'm here today to specifically advocate for a greater emphasis on de-escalation training in our local police force. My perception has been that there is a severe imbalance placed on preserving officers' lives in force-based incidents above all others. One of the greatest assets which police bring to resolving violent and potentially violent situations is their training and experience. And I see de-escalation training as a crucial investment in improving our local police force. Thank you very much.
Are there any others?
Okay, that concludes our public comments, so we'll go into commissioner comments and responses. And Edward, not to pick on you, but can we get you to start, and we'll just go around the table from there?
Yeah, I have no comment this one.
Hi there. So one point of clarification as to one of the public comments. The CRB reviewed a case, trespassing case, where concerning two individuals that might have been considered homeless. It really came about because of one of the members, not necessarily from the auditor's office. The auditor received a number of queries from a particular board member and felt bringing it to that forum was maybe a more efficient way to handle it. Not to say that there aren't cases where there would be merit to discussion, but this particular one really had no merit. And that's why a number of other board members said as much. But I wouldn't dismiss that the auditor's office wouldn't consider a situation where perhaps a homeless person was singled out because of their status. We reviewed two cases. We also reviewed another case where a woman was assaulted and an officer was required to do what was reasonable to apprehend the person based on statute because there was an injury and there was a restraining order and some other issues that made this an arrestable offense. And the first allegation for unsatisfactory performance was sustained by command staff, and it was viewed as much by the auditor's office and the Civilian Review Board. The second allegation was courtesy regarding treatment of the victim. And the issue seemed like it was fairly narrowed to perhaps a passing comment from one officer to another about looks like you're not going to get out on time or something to that effect. And on that basis, the allegation was determined unfounded because there really wasn't coarse language and that was not enough to rise to the level of courtesy. But the auditor's office and the board felt like courtesy was too narrowly defined in that situation. That it was beyond. It doesn't need to rise to a level of like coarse language. There was other factors at play that appeared the officer really was disinterested in this particular individual, and it's kind of inconsistent with that protect and serve. It didn't seem like that particular victim received the service part of our philosophy. So it's kind of good timing that we're going to take a look at the conduct policy because courtesy is part of that, and perhaps courtesy is that word can be fairly broad and ambiguous. So maybe there's an opportunity to narrow that a little bit, define it a little bit more. But a number of us felt like this experience was not in alignment with courtesy. Last I'll say is I totally agree with the last commenters about de-escalation. I think I brought to us last month a situation where the CRB felt the situation was escalated rather than de-escalated, and I would hope that we would give an opportunity to try and de-escalate first before escalate. And I think it's proven, it's helpful, and I do believe that we should take more steps or we should take more effort to try and de-escalate before we resort to a force type situation. So I totally agree with the comments, and thank you. That's all I have.
So, Chris, we do allow you to, if you have comments or responses, you can pass if you'd like to. Respond.
Thanks. I'll pass.
Bob?
Passing.
Terry?
I just wanted to add, I agree with Davy Jackson's discussion about de-escalation being of paramount importance, and really it actually dovetails quite nicely with courtesy. Can go a long way to de-escalating a situation, and so that is certainly worth considering deeper. And also perhaps Majeska's, I don't know how her request that we extend this and not decide tonight. I don't know how things have been done in the past with other reviews of policies, but that sounds like it makes sense at this point, so that other people can, if they're interested, watch what's happening tonight and enter their comments later.
Will?
I, too, am interested in de-escalation and the promulgating of it. I've been on a number of ride-alongs with officers that seem to me very skilled at de-escalation. And I wish there were some way that kind of knowledge could be shared. So that's all.
Yeah, I'd like to respond to a few things. Well, hopefully we do take a close look at the search procedure and inventory rules and particularly how they affect the homeless, because I think that's where some of the greatest impact can be on people's lives. The CORT program that Jack mentioned, I had nothing to do with that other than to say okay when they asked for the funds for it. That was Sergeant Julie Smith and her team invited Lane County Behavioral Health and Whiteford to assist them with that. And I'm still waiting to see the report, but definitely in the effect on individuals' lives, it's been a number of individuals' lives, it's been pretty positive. The case that was mentioned with the assault in the jail, where an officer was prosecuted for the crimes that occurred there. The other officers that were present, we took an awfully close look at all that. We didn't take that lightly. No one had to come to us and suggest that there could potentially be a violation of policy by those officers. There's no evidence those officers violated any policy at all. If there was an opportunity for them to intervene before the officer walked across 2.5 feet of bookend room to assault the person who's in custody, I hope that they would have. Our policy now requires officers to intervene if there's an opportunity to do so, and we have a draft that considers intervening when and interceding if an officer is failing to de-escalate a situation, but they're escalating the situation. So it's like that. Those scenarios like that would repeat themselves. So right now we're trying to consider how to compose a policy that will get to that and encourage interceding when an officer isn't handling something well. And then I really appreciate Mr. Jackson's comments. Police use of force is really at the center, and our relationship with the community is at the center of the controversy that's going on around the country. Most agencies like ours are scanning the world to try and understand how to succeed at our jobs, and we've been really fortunate here at our department where we've required that every officer go through crisis intervention training, which is a 40-hour course that includes de-escalation training. It's interesting that Officer Mackey's here tonight, who's an exemplary example of how well most of our officers do this. I'm glad that we have a CRB that's reviewing cases. It's a little frustrating sometimes to listen to it because they're the extreme examples of the work we do when it's not done well. And sometimes they're examples of our officers doing the work well, even though they've been accused of having done something wrong. But definitely our focus in terms of use of force should be on preserving life and rendering aid when we should. and de-escalating. And even though we do a better job, I think, than any other agency, definitely within our region and most agencies in Oregon, and de-escalating difficult encounters with people in crisis, I wish that we could provide more training, and I'm encouraging our training section to do even more hands-on training in that area.
Scott?
I saw that we had our first graduate in the community court. It was in the paper and on the news, and that was exciting after their presentation about what was going to take place. And I was thinking that it might be a great idea in a future date, maybe 6 months to a year, to kind of learn what they've learned since then and get an update on some data. But we can talk about that another time.
I just want to thank all the speakers tonight. I always appreciate all the comments, and there was a lot of good things brought up today. I do want to remind people that the commission, this body, does not hear complaints or deal with those. That is the auditors and the CRB. But I do appreciate that you do bring things up here. And, you know, if you look at, Mr. Jackson, all your comments are great. And if you looked at, you know, this body is trying to be out ahead of that. If you look at our professional police stops that we've looked at that policy, on our work plan was was medical aid to people rendering medical aid, and the search and seizure and things like that. So we are trying to stay out and be proactive. This department has been always good at doing that, bringing those things up. So, but I do appreciate your comments. They're very important in today's world that we do take a look at all of this again and make sure we're doing it the best way we can. So thank you, everyone. So we'll move on now to the approval of July minutes, which I think we didn't get quite all the minutes.
And I just sent around the second page.
So if everyone take a quick look at that, see if there's any changes. Anybody have any comments?
I move approval of minutes as submitted.
Second by Scott. And do we have any discussion? If not, we'll vote. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Passes. So then we will move on to policy 702 and 703. Sergeant Williams, do you mind joining us?
I don't recall how it was lined up in the schedule for tonight. We had a few responses also from the last meeting, a couple of things to add back in. Do we have that on is that a separate line item, or should I go through those first and get that out of the way?
You could go through.
So one was, there was a question posed about whether or not law enforcement officers are hold immunity for rendering aid. And ORS 30.805 is liability for emergency medical assistance by government personnel, and that does specifically.
You moved ahead of me. This is search and seizures?
Yeah, this isn't necessarily the rendering aid. There was a specific question or response.
Okay.
There was a specific question about liability or immunity.
Okay.
I suppose we could have talked about this one. There were a couple. There's a couple in here that I have. So.
No, you go ahead.
So that says that no person may maintain an action for damages or injury, death, or loss results from acts or omissions in rendering emergency medical assistance unless it is alleged and proved by the complaining party that the acts or omissions violate the standards of reasonable care. And that's if they are authorized within the scope of their official duties or licensed to provide emergency medical care, or a government agency or other entity that employs, trains, supervises, or sponsors the staff person. So that does provide officers with, similar to the, there's one for the public as well, the, now I'm blanking the word.
Good Samaritan.
Good Samaritan law. That's it. And then a second question was about taser aftercare, and I suppose actually both of these are kind of related to the rendering aid. So we can talk about that once we get to that one. You guys all have the Portland policy, so we will just kick right back over to 702. So these are policies that have been in place for some time. They were up for regular review earlier this year, and they've been undergoing. There are some places where they kind of interact together, and so that's why they've sort of been clustered together. At the same time, they're pretty largely separate as well. They really do deal with different circumstances. So we'll do just kind of like we did before. I'll just go through each section and see if anyone has any comments or concerns. At this point, these have gone out to the department for review, as well as a pretty extensive sit down with the city attorney as well as the district attorney's office to hammer out the both sides of the liability question that they have. So that's where these are at. 702.1 is a purpose and scope for searches and inventories of detained persons. And so this policy is to establish consistent department procedures which conform to the ORSs that are involved. And then another one that is semi-connected but is not under review is the 322, which is search and seizure. You'll notice that the numbers have been changed. There is a little bit of a reformatting happening for the police operations manual. So some numbers have changed. And what I caught today is that some of the numbers inside here, you'll still see some references to 902 or 903. And those have been corrected as well as I continue to comb through these for little errors here and there. 702.2 is definitions. Search incident to arrest, personal property inventory, strip search or visual body cavity search, physical body cavity search, and gives a description of what each of one of those things is for the purpose of our policy.
I found, this is just a curiosity for me, but
Yeah.
There's a kind of dual use of the word inventory. One of them, I mean, I suppose it's police department jargon. One of it basically means search, and in the other, it's more like the ordinary use of the word where you're making a list or keeping a.
Yeah.
So I'm just observing that that's.
So there was actually some discussion with the DA's office about whether to actually separate inventories and searches from completely different policies. The problem is that they really do. There's similar rules, and it's impactful to have them both in the same policy.
Yeah.
While the words and the actions can be similar, the premise behind each one is very different. And so that really is the difference. The difference is that a search is you're searching for bad stuff, usually, with a lawful reason, whereas an inventory is looking for things that fall into the criteria that are for legal liability. And so that's why both of these policies, rather than having just a DA involved because there's a legal search and seizure making evidence work, there's also a civil liability component because of the inventory and the potential loss and the reason for doing the inventory. And so it's a good observation and one that we discussed, but it made more sense to leave them together.
Got that. I also noted that there's no definition of personal property. And my mind went on a run, imagining possible trouble that might raise.
That's an interesting thought.
Especially when it comes to this storage of personal property. Because with no boundary at all on what constitutes personal property in the policy, I can imagine all sorts of troublesome and curious incidents. I mean, sometimes people have a lot of personal property.
Some people do have a lot of property.
And I wondered, for example, like I drive around a lot, and I have a lot of personal property in my car, some of which is expensive stuff sometimes. I'd wonder how such things are handled. Or this may be just my problem.
Yeah, for our purposes, personal property is anything that the person has in their possession. Now, if it's illegal or it's contraband, then that's contraband. You could say that it was their property until it became our property, or it came into our custody. But
I wasn't really thinking of that. I was thinking of like a bunch of camera gear or something that's in the car with the person in there arrested.
yeah.
I guess you just handle it.
Yeah, and we do everything we can to ensure the safety of those items. If there's a way that we can take it with them or lodge it securely, especially a high dollar item, that there's certainly officers have a mind on making sure that people's things are taken care of. If it's in a vehicle that's being impounded, it'll be noted on the impound sheet. If there's an opportunity for them to be able to take it, then we'll offer them the opportunity to take it. Otherwise, we'll document that it was there. Anything over $100 is documented on the impound sheet if it stays with the car, so that there is a record that it was there and it can't just disappear from the impound lot. So try to put in some balances to make sure that people's property is respected and that there's a recording of it. Which is why the inventory is an important.
Yes, of course.
An inventory search is an important thing. Any other thoughts or comments on the definitions?
I guess I had a question of something that's not defined. In a number of places, the term "whenever practical" is used. How is that interpreted in practice? How is that used? Because I mean, that could mean a number of different things to a number of different people.
It's a good question. I think you could probably insert when possible. When you're able to do it, this is generally what you should do. But because every situation is so unique or can be so unique, that it's hard to put a box around everything.
Right.
But I'll make a note of that too to consider to look at.
So just to dig a little deeper on that question, it talks about on the next page, 702.3, searches incident to arrest, and maybe I'm jumping ahead, but this will help me contextualize. It talks about whenever practical, searches should be conducted by an officer of the same sex. So if that means if I'm an officer of a single sex and I am arresting someone of an opposite sex, is it practical for me to conduct the search if I don't have a partner with me who is of the opposite sex? Or is it practical for me to call and ask for another officer, and if one is not available, then I conduct the search? Do you kind of get my drift?
Yeah, it would just depend on the circumstances.
Okay.
We're not going to wait 20 minutes for another officer to drive from the other side of town in a routine type situation, or 30 minutes, or to clear up from another call. If there is another officer available, the person makes a request for it. If there's something about the situation that makes it more sensitive or concerning, if you don't have what generally wouldn't happen without a cover officer or another officer of either sex there with you. It really just depends on the circumstances and what the urgency in getting the process done. Certainly, if a request is made for the search to be done by another officer, an officer of the same sex, then that's taken into consideration. There can just be a lot of factors that weigh into it.
Okay, thanks.
Are any of the searches done? I mean, do we make room for having the searches conducted in front of like an ITV or some other way that's recorded, other than like body searches and such, of course? But
generally speaking, that is the practice of what's happening these days. Is officers would walk the person to the front of the car, and the pat down or the search would be conducted on camera, especially if someone of the opposite gender. That is the routine.
But that's not in here, though, right?
It's not required.
It is
Again, depending on the circumstances, sometimes completing a pat down search, being able to get somebody to a car is not a practical thing to do in order to complete that for safety reasons.
Well, I'm thinking
if you're on a call where you've parked 3 blocks down the road, you're more likely to do a pat down search before you walk the 3 blocks with the person.
Well, I was also thinking with the body worn cameras that's been or is being issued, if they're not already issued, there would be more opportunities for that, even if they're not in front of the car.
Certainly.
I wonder if maybe that should find its way in here somewhere.
And that would be something to consider. It would also be something to consider in the camera policy, because that's more equipment focused about when and how to use the equipment versus this policy, which is much more about when and how to do the searches themselves.
How reasonable would it be to have something impossible, and in policy here, in that last paragraph perhaps, that says whenever practical, searches will be conducted in front of an in-car video or body worn video? Would that be confining for our officers, you think? Or?
As long as you, again, have that window, the practical window, I don't see any issue with it. I would just, before we decided to put it in this one, I would be interested in looking at the equipment policies to see if it's either A, already there, or if it may fit more effectively there. But in one of those places, I don't see any issue with having that language. It would just be verifying the right place for it.
Certainly. What you see, if I could just for a second interject a little bit, what you see in a lot of the DUII investigations or cases in which a search occurs, the officer moves the person around to the front of the car, so they're counting money in front of the camera. Pretty typical practice. So I imagine having it in a policy wouldn't change much for us if it was written properly.
I completely agree. That's why it's nice to have your all perspective, because I see that that's how we do business, and so it's easy to fill in the blanks on some of these. So no, I would not change the practice of what's happening probably 99% of the time, 90% of the time.
Yes.
But certainly helps to helps for the public to know and to pull in the folks that aren't doing it. Search is incident to arrest. We've already kind of gone through part of that or referenced it. Anybody have any other thoughts or questions to that section? .4 personal property inventory. An officer will inventory a detained or arrested person's personal property before the person is placed inside the temporary holding facility at police headquarters, lodged at any jail facility, or before he or she is transferred to another agency's custody. And this is where it starts to define the difference between an inventory search and a criminal search.
I was curious there was a recent Supreme Court case came down regarding the Fourth Amendment and prohibition of searching like packages, closed packages, and it had to do with the postal inspector pulling suspicious packages, having a drug dog sniff, and the Supreme Court said, no, you can't do that. And I'm just wondering has that case perhaps come into consideration as we look at this policy? I don't know if it would have any implications or not, but
it certainly does.
Certainly
yeah.
Should be something to look at. Right?
And it has made a difference in our practices and what we do. And in fact, under Section C down there, you'll kind of see where it says specifically for closed containers, it must be uniquely designed or objectively likely to contain any of the items listed in 703 storage of prisoner property, A through K, and then it lists those things again. And the interesting part about that, as police officers, we can get a little bit jaded about what is uniquely designed or objectively likely. And the objectively likely is a little different for what we see day in and day out. And there has been some training and discussion that what we believe is objectively likely to contain one of those items doesn't count. It really has to be what a civilian would deem objectively likely. The Altoids container.
Oh, it's not what a reasonable officer would, it's what a civilian would.
I've never seen an Altoids container in the course of my duties that contained Altoids. And yet, that alone isn't justification to open an Altoids container when doing a search. And that's a specific case where that specifically was argued, and the search was lost because of that. So yeah, you're dead on with that case and the ramifications that it's had for us. And that has been pretty significantly blocked in here. On the other,
Sorry, is this the section, and I'm trying to figure out, from some of the public comment we heard, there's concern from those in the homeless community about this policy. I'm trying to figure out where exactly that is. Is this where we're running into that with, these inventories? If so, can you illuminate what issues you've heard of? Because some of that's news to me.
I haven't heard of any issues.
Right.
The issue
I think-
with the homeless is related more to the storage.
This is the storage. Okay.
And I'm not sure that that there were specific issues as much as these are impactful policies, and that more public comment time was requested, as opposed to there being specific parts that have problems.
I think I have a question that fits here. With reading this over, there are a number of things you can't take into the jail, and there's some things you can't put in the storage locker outside the jail either. I was curious about what happens to those things. Are they...
So that's going to be more in 703.
Okay.
It depends on the item is what it comes down to. Some items need to be transported to our evidence control unit.
Yeah.
Some items will be disposed of. Food and perishable items will be disposed of. Guns and other significant valuables would go to the evidence control unit. It just kind of depends on what the item is, on what happens with it.
Okay.
If it's something that can't be stored at the jail or the jail lockers.
Sounds like potentially quite a bit of stuff might get thrown away.
It's possible. It's not very common, though.
No?
Food is the biggest one. Food and matches. Food and lighters.
Food and lighters. Okay.
There's actually inside the jail there is a specific bin that's specifically for lighters.
Okay. A lot of lighters.
So if an unhoused person is stopped and arrested, and then an inventory, does the personal possessions extend to what they have? Like if they have a card or a mat with all their stuff on it, does the personal property extend to that, or is it only what's on their person?
Well, it depends on what we're doing with that property. If they require that property goes with them, and it has to be lodged in a jail locker, then the inventory search needs to be conducted on the belongings that are with them from one end to the other.
Okay. Do they get to request that their possessions come with them to the
Yeah, but
jail?
it's oftentimes that they would prefer that their stuff stays with a friend. And so it's not uncommon that they'll ask, hey, do you mind if my bike and my dog and my bag all go with my buddy here? And usually we're more than happy to. In fact, we thank them because the process of lodging property is arduous and time-consuming, and is not something that most officers care to engage in. They can help it. So.
Like a shopping cart.
Yeah,
It's exposed.
Yeah, if there's for some reason it doesn't fit at the jail lockers, then it has to go to the evidence control unit.
Okay.
And does go to the evidence control unit. Which is again why the big shopping carts present a bit of a challenge for us, along with figuring out how to transport it. So we've had to have community service officers come with their pickup trucks to help collect property to be able to take it to ECU to lodge. The second half of that is that part of that legal ruling is that there are a number of items that have been deemed shall be open, and you'll see those fishing tackle boxes for fillet knives, gun cleaning bags and rigs for firearms, open cigarette packages for lighters or matches, etc. So while some things are restrictive, there's other things that are actually mandated because the courts have deemed that these are likely to contain specific items that need to be discovered, inventory removed for safety reasons. 702.5 strip searches. Probably the most important line in that is the one that says that no person held at any Eugene Police Department facility shall be subjected to a strip search unless there is a reasonable suspicion based upon specific and articulable facts to believe the person is concealing a weapon or contraband. I can tell you that in my time here, I've never seen that happen. If there's ever any hint of requiring that sort of a search, it's done at the jail by jail staff. In fact, I was working one night where another agency brought somebody here and requested it, and we said, no thanks, and directed them to the jail. They're set up for it, they're trained for it. It's not something that we do here, is the reality of what that section is.
In the personal property inventory, the standard that's used is the objectively likely, and it was changed from reasonable suspicion to objectively likely, and then in this piece of the policy, they use reasonable suspicion still. Is there a legal reason
Hang on,
for that?
I didn't follow the first little bit of that.
So with personal property inventories, the policy changes from using reasonable suspicion to objectively likely.
Under letter A
as the
there.
standard, that's correct.
Okay.
And then under the strip searches portion, it uses objectively likely, or I'm sorry, it uses reasonable suspicion as the standard for when a strip search would be conducted. Is there a reason for why reasonable suspicion is retained here and changed in the earlier section?
It comes back to that. I believe this was an attorney change.
I was guessing.
And it's because reasonable suspicion is generally what's used for everything in law enforcement.
Right.
The objectively likely relates to closed containers.
Okay.
And so there is a difference in that. And generally speaking, reasonable suspicion is what you're going to see most everywhere,
right,
except for when it comes to the inventory searches in closed containers.
I would just add, as between those two, the standard is higher. Reasonable suspicion standard is higher than objectively likely, so they have had more cause to do that.
Thanks.
Then the strip search protocols. Again, this is, anybody have any questions about the protocol section?
You said earlier that a strip search would not occur here.
It would be some very unique circumstance, which is why we have rules around it. It's not to say that it couldn't legally happen. Generally, in practice, it would be very unusual.
In general practice, if you follow the path for this, they would be taken to the jail, though?
Yes.
So would there be any reason to bring anyone here that you can think of and deviate from going to the jail to do that?
Well, it certainly is possible that need, or the need to have it done, occurs after you've already arrived here. It's not uncommon for us to bring suspects here for questioning or for ongoing, to wait for another process to take place. It's not uncommon to have suspects in one of the holding cells waiting for something else to take place. And so it may be that you don't even realize that you need it until you're already here. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
It does.
Okay.
It does. Thank you.
Physical body cavity search. No person arrested shall be subjected to a body cavity search without a search warrant. This again is going to follow pretty well into the same thing. Never say never, never say always. If we had to, we've got a set of rules for what the requirements are. Again, this is not something that we're trained for, or generally, or is likely to occur here.
The definition, though, for a medically trained person for this.
What's that?
What would be the definition of a medically trained person or personnel for this?
Where is that in here?
D. It says agency physician
Yeah.
or other medically trained
At the
person.
physician's direction. Somebody that's received specific medical training in how to conduct a body cavity search, which is probably going to be, and more likely than not, is going to be a doctor. The only circumstance where I could see this potentially happening is if we had a search warrant and we took somebody to the hospital and it was conducted that way. And again, it's possible but unlikely.
I know at one time when we did this, we got a search warrant to go to the emergency room. The doctor was going to conduct the exam, and the suspect ended up providing the evidence for us without having to do that. But he was examined after that anyway, just to be sure. But it was all done in an emergency room by the medical professionals over there, and I think that's probably what we'd see happen.
We don't have anybody that's medically trained to conduct this sort of a search within the department.
It just when it's in there, it opens things up for interpretation. So that's why I was asking those questions. If maybe they can be closed up a little bit. If we don't intend on bringing someone here for that, and if we intend on it being a physician, maybe that's what it is worded, not opened up there.
Okay. And the last section is just training, and that's at the lieutenant professional standards in conjunction with the training section. We'll make sure that officers are trained properly, or have the training. Any final comments on 702?
I have two issues that came up in the discussion I'd like to talk about. I'll start with the last one first, and that's the issue on the body cavity searches. And my interpretation of reading this is that this is a shall be. It's not there ought to be or might be or should be. It's a shall be. And it says shall be performed only by an authorized agency physician or medically trained personnel at the physician's direction. So if they're medically trained personnel, they're not a police officer. They're obviously somebody who's had medical training and a staff person from the hospital, a nurse, physician assistant, somebody like that. And maybe you just need to tighten that language up a little bit to make it clear that they're talking about staff, hospital staff or something, not police officers, but I think common sense would tell us that, most of that. The other issue is the searches of subjects and trying to make sure that we don't, not everybody has body cameras yet. And I think the agenda we talked about last time is maybe next year, but not this year. So we're looking at a while yet before that happens. So in the meantime, the issue of moving a person into the view of the in-car video is a good idea and is done, as somebody pointed out, DUI arrests and such. But there may be circumstances where the officer safety issue comes into play. And that happens when an officer has reasonable suspicion, according to Supreme Court standards, to believe that a person might be armed and a danger to him or somebody else. They have a right to pat him down. So if that occurs, I would hope that an exception would be made to the policy that would allow for reasonable suspicion by an officer to believe someone's armed, that they'd be able to pat him down immediately and not have to march them maybe a block or half a block to the car to try to get them in the camera so they could have time to draw out their gun and shoot the officer. So this is something that I'd tread lightly on, or I'd make sure that it's clear that there are circumstances where an officer has a right to pat somebody down for safety. That's all I have. Thank you.
Anybody else have comments on?
I'd just say the chief's reasonably practical would probably cover that situation. Because a block isn't going to be practical, so I think that'd be covered. Great point.
It can just be each situation can be so different in the nuances of where you're at, what the circumstances are. It's why policy can be difficult, because we want it to be specific and clear, and yet to be specific and clear means that it has to be 100 pages long for each document. And so it is finding that balance between leaving it open to trust the officers that we hire and retain that we believe are going to be good, doing the right things at the right time with the right intentions, and providing them with a guide that isn't too restrictive so that they're not even able to figure out what they're supposed to do, or they throw it out the window because it's impossible to read. So we'll take a look at how we can make an adjustment there to see what that looks like. I'm good with that.
Kyle, didn't our last search and seizure or search policy had covered pat down and frisk searches, which is a less intrusive thing and requires a lower level of evidence?
I believe it does, but I'd have to look at it for what the specific.
Would this replace that one? Because if it does, we should probably cover pat down and frisks and our authority to conduct those.
So though you're talking about putting that practicality piece in the definitions, in 702.4, I'll just read it real quick. In some cases, it is safer for the officer and the individual being searched for this inventory to be conducted in the field at the patrol car where it can be witnessed by another officer, captured on ICV, and before the person is seated in the patrol car. If a situation exists where it is not safe or practical to conduct a personal property inventory in the field, a thorough pat-down search may be conducted to ensure no weapons are admitted into the patrol car, and then a more thorough inventory can be done after the person's been transported or to the jail or Sally Port. So you do touch on a lot of that stuff in that. Maybe I'm off base here with my confusion on this discussion, but
You're right. The problem is that it's in the personal inventory, property inventory section, and it doesn't note it in the search incident to arrest. Okay. Where you could almost bring that section out and put it up above both of those sections so that it covers both of those sections. So there's probably a way to work it in there to simplify the document and yet still cover the interest. Make sure that it's clear that it applies to both sections and not just the personal inventory. I'm sorry, Chief. What? So you were saying that the search and seizure is going to talk about you. I didn't track
Well,
exactly.
it's been a long
what you were
time since I
saying
looked at it, but we don't cover searches here, but not frisks, which is a lower level of intrusion on a person. And there is we have authority to conduct frisks. And sometimes we meet the threshold, sometimes we don't. So it seems like it ought to be covered in policy, and this would be a good place for it. If it's someplace else in our manual, then maybe it's covered adequately.
I believe it's covered under the search and seizure, but I would have to look.
Okay.
All right, so the next policy is the storage of prisoner property. 703. And so this is specifically to storing prisoner property as it relates to the jail and the jail lockers. And again, the review was conducted with the goal of covering both sides of the legal basis. Definitions: prisoner property inventory, secure area, and jail lockers. So this one, we do have the personal property. It's called prisoner property, but that is a definition for the personal property.
Where is the evidence control unit? Is it?
It's located at 2nd and Garfield.
So this policy applies to that as well.
The primary focus is for what can and can't be stored at the jail or the jail lockers. The evidence control unit is referenced because some things will need to be transported there.
Okay. Right.
But this is not an evidence control unit storage manual. It's for the jail specifically. Although there certainly will be some references to the evidence control unit.
Sergeant, so does the evidence control unit, does it have its own policy that states how that evidence or things are handled there, what can be put
There's a
there?
fairly extensive packaging manual on how and what,
leave them off.
where, and yeah.
Okay.
I'm thinking 30 or 35 pages, probably. And it pretty much goes through anything that you could ever need to lodge there. There's a description of how to lodge it and under what procedures and all that jazz. 703.4 inventorying responsibilities. The jail lockers are for items that will not fit in the jail property bag, which is lodged in the jail with the custody. If possible, items should be lodged inside the jail with the custody. The goal is to put everything inside in their bag. The reality is the bag is about this big. And while I have spent some time tightly rolling and jamming and stuffing stuff into that bag, you can't always get everything in there that the person has with them.
A general question about that. So what happens as part of this inventory, what happens if a person is arrested for a crime unrelated to what we consider another crime that's discovered during the inventory? So e.g. illegal drugs, that was in a bag or something, arrested, like they were shot, so they're arrested for shoplifting, we found illegal amounts of drugs or whatever. What would happen then?
The discovery of that evidence during a legal lawful inventory search is the discovery of evidence, as long as the inventory search is followed.
So then they'd be charged with a separate, like another crime. Then,
Certainly could be, yeah. More likely than not would be. Which is part of why the clamp down on closed containers, because the courts ruled that in the searches and inventories that those closed containers, if they're not objectively likely to hold something of value, which is the reason for doing an inventory search, is for looking for restricted items or prohibited items that can't be stored for safety reasons within the facility, or to look for items of value for legal loss or potential claims against the organization. If the item is not objectively likely to carry or hold or contain one of those things, then that's why you can't open it, because we're not doing a search for anything that the person might have. The inventory search is for contraband or items of value. So it actually, the protection is in order to avoid having inventory searches be a
pretext for other crimes.
For looking for other crimes,
Right.
exactly. Make sure it stays in check. So then we launch into kind of a section, and I'll just read the title because they can kind of drone on a little bit. The breakdown of the different types of items that are prohibited. One thing that was noticed, the last line or the last paragraph before Section A says, unless otherwise noted in the specific section, the following items are not acceptable for storage inside the Wayne County Jail or the jail lockers due to safety and security reasons. But there are a number of places in here. Most of these sections we do note which of the facilities they're not, and there are a couple that we don't say that. So we'll look at seeing if it's easier to just delete all of the language that says it's not allowed, or make sure that each section says that it is not allowed, and then just remove that line at the top. So a little bit of a clarification there. So the first section is dangerous weapons, including explosive devices, knives, fireworks, tools, ammunition, and firearms.
I didn't see in here necessarily like a directive for what you do with that if it's not acceptable. I know you said we get a bin for lighters, but I mean, do you have a general directive for things that cannot be stored? What you do with them anywhere in here?
Well, if it's an item of value, then it would need to be stored at the evidence control unit. If it's an item of no value, perishable food, something like that, then it would be disposed of.
So like fireworks or explosives.
Fireworks have to be disposed of in a prescribed manner, and they're back at ECU now, right?
Yeah.
There was a time period where we were even disposing of fireworks and explosives that are in a different facility where our EDU staff, explosive disposal staff, would do that disposal. But yeah, fireworks all need to be, there's again in that packaging manual, there's a prescribed manner for how those are
Okay,
lodged.
so what to do with it's defined somewhere else, not necessarily here.
For individual property, yeah, that would be or could be lodged. The manner and how you lodge it is in that packaging manual. But again, items like live plants, if it's not something that's going to keep and hold, it's likely to be destroyed, thrown into garbage. Food, etc. It just kind of depends a little bit. If there's no value to the item and it's something that's not allowed, then it's going to be disposed of. If it's something that is trying to think, most drugs in an illegal amount, or most drugs are going to be lodged at ECU.
If a person had legal explosives that were of some considerable value, $50 or something, would those be taken to the evidence control?
They would be, yeah. Yeah, because any explosive is dangerous to have inside at that location, and so that's one that would need to be lodged per the rules for explosives at the evidence control unit.
Okay.
So then that's what's going to be a lot of these is things that are legal, just not safe to have there. And so again, it's kind of item by item. This one specifically states at the bottom is that firearms will be stored at the evidence control unit. And so that is one where there is some direction given that all of those items will be lodged there. Clothing that has been contaminated by a dangerous chemical, that's something that's going to be more likely than not disposed of in the proper receptacle. If it's a biohazard item, it's going to be put in a biohazard bag and disposed of. That's not property that we're going to go through the effort of saving, as long as it's something that's destroyed or contaminated. So that's the next one. Hazardous materials, chemicals, clothing, or other properties that have been contaminated by dangerous chemicals or biohazardous materials. These substances should be discarded in an appropriate manner pursuant to department policy. Illegal drugs, drug paraphernalia, and other medications not kept in their original packaging.
There's some tension between C and D, and I just think the language is interesting. It's the mere existence of illegal drugs and drug paraphernalia within the confines of the facility. Talks about increases likelihood of the introduction in the facility due to inmate manipulation, outright coercion, etc. But then in D, it talks about marijuana specifically in illegal amounts. Oh, and it says it cannot be stored in the jail or jail lockers, but then in D, it can be stored. It's marijuana in illegal amounts and or forms will be seized as evidence as crime. Legal amounts of substance of marijuana may be stored in jail lockers, which I think is funny because, it speaks to drugs, not being stored there because of problems might be associated, but here some amounts can be stored. So I don't know if maybe some massage of the language a little bit because they feel a little bit inconsistent with each other.
Well, pharmaceutical drugs, as long as they're in their original packaging, are to be stored in their property bag inside the jail, which is noted down below. Illegal drugs are not going to be stored there because they're illegal, and they're going to be lodged at the evidence unit. And then if they've been discovered through the inventory search in a place where it was allowed for the officer to look there, then there's going to be a criminal charge for the possession of that drug. Marijuana isn't illegal.
In Oregon.
In Oregon. And so this is one of those where we ran that tightrope, and it's hard to get out of the mindset. But the reality is that marijuana is legal. And we don't want officers driving to ECU every time there's a dime bag of pot in somebody's bag to lodge it there. That also launches us into another issue, and that ECU won't release marijuana to somebody without a court order because it's federally illegal. So we're in this awkward place where we don't want to be in the position of taking people's Oregon legal property from them. And yet at the same time, it's hard to get out of that mindset that marijuana isn't illegal anymore. Because for some of us, we've spent a lot of years considering it as an illegal substance. So for the purpose of C, marijuana isn't an illegal drug.
And so that's the difference. Unless it's an illegal amount, and then it's essentially treated as it would be in C. Which is why the D marijuana section is shorter, because it really is just because we want to make a point that marijuana in legal forms can be stored there. And I tell you, we went around and around on this one. Because there's a very small potential that if marijuana has not been cured properly, that it's also a vegetative substance, as noted in section F, and can rot and spoil and cause problems. But that risk is small enough that it's more important that people retain their property and that the odds are low, that we, again, kept it in the D section as stating specifically that it can be stored in the jail locker.
So on the prescription drugs side of things, I'm assuming people are able to receive medically necessary prescriptions when they're lodged in the jail. They don't have to bring them in with them, because I think of folks who keep their, they get their prescriptions, they put them into their monthly little, thing for, Sunday through Sunday, Saturday, and they throw away the bottle or whatever. And so, obviously you can't account for, is this really their drug? Are these really their prescription medications? And are they being honest? And are they what they say they are? But, how do we work through that with people who say that this is a medically necessary prescription, even if it's not in the original container?
It has to be in the original container for it to go into the jail, or for it to be retained by them. If they cannot prove that it's theirs, and as you can imagine, we find people that have. I'm not sure I've arrested somebody that had a Sunday to Saturday organizer, but I've seen pills in all kinds of other organizers.
Yeah. I'm sure you don't carry them around. And so that's it's going to be a rare circumstance where somebody's legally allowed to have it, but if they don't have the documentation that proves that it's legally theirs and it's a substance that they shouldn't have without that, then they can't have it. It's gonna be seized and probably lodged at ECU.
And then the jail has medical staff present.
Yeah.
So if they have a need for medication, then it can be provided.
My understanding is that the jail provides that medication, though. Their medication is maintained in their sealed property bag. They are not prescribed. They're not given a dose of their own medicine, again, because you just don't know what it truly may or may not be. So that's controlled by the jail.
It's interesting. Do they even supply very expensive and rare drugs?
I don't know what you mean.
Well,
but it's a huge contract, and
so that answers probably
quite a number of people in the jail are taking medication that's been prescribed.
I take one drug that's $1,500 a month. So that's right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Storm's here, I guess.
Yeah, here it comes.
So that takes us marijuana, pharmaceuticals, and prescription drugs, all food, perishable items, and biodegradable or vegetative substances, matches, lighters, or other ignition sources. This is one of those where, actually, I guess both of these, F and G, both don't specifically define, but the underlying is that the things that are articulated are not allowed. Marijuana didn't have that last sentence right up until the end, but because there was this fairly significant debate about the vegetative versus legal versus the time and effort for officers to do it, in order to make sure that it was crystal clear what this said, we did add that no marijuana may be stored in the secure area to just ensure that there wasn't any question. Try to avoid officers getting into trouble. Propellants, live animals, plants, or other organisms, valuable items, or money.
All jewelry and currency will be removed from the arrested person, inventoried, and held in the arrested person's jail property bag where it can be signed for by the arrested person. Money and valuable items may not be stored in the jail lockers. So the jail bag actually has a tear-off section on the bottom that's for cash. So any cash is totaled up, person's name put on it, put in that separate bag, and then the jail seals that up separately. And then there's a main bag where the rest of everything else, jewelry and change and all that stuff, and then that's all inventoried on another jail form. And that all stays with the person. And then electronics. So, and then electronics are one where it does note that they shall be stored at the evidence control unit.
So I guess I have one comment. From when you originally talked about that first sentence above A, where you start this, and as we work through these columns, I almost seem like that needs to come out because there's so many of these sections that say, well, but this can be and that can't be.
I agree that I was leaning towards that this afternoon. It's probably just easiest to delete that and then add a line to a couple of them that don't have direction.
Right.
That's the smoothest, the easiest way to do it. There's one of those 902s that I missed. And then 703.5, property storage procedure.
There's a 902 under E.
Yeah, and that's a couple of those I did fix this afternoon.
Oh.
So then the rest of this is just the specific instructions on how to watch stuff at the jail locker, because there isn't a packaging manual at the jail lockers. And the jail lockers, you're not generally doing inventory packaging or individual item packaging. It's the group stuff, so there's just less to it. And that pretty much takes us to the end. If anybody has any thoughts or specific questions about that section. This way.
Terry, before you start,
okay.
Well, I just want to start a cue as we get to this
Okay.
section. So, but you could be first, Terry. So go ahead.
Okay. I was just curious if it were ever possible or practical, for instance, if somebody has a bicycle or other, just even tools, if you arrested someone who has tools for their work and whatnot, does someone ever, can they ever say, can my husband, wife, mother, father come pick up this stuff so that you don't have to keep it and nobody else does, so that it just gets taken away by someone that they know?
It's
if it's not an illegal substance,
Yeah,
obviously.
Yeah, it's possible. The problem with that is usually the act of getting hold of somebody and getting them there in a timely fashion.
It's just not practical. But.
So it certainly has happened. A super cooperative suspect and the circumstances where it's just there's less urgency, or the person's already on scene, or that for whatever reason they're already en route waiting an extra 10 minutes. Certainly. It saves us time. So if we can figure out how to move property onto somebody else, we're all for it.
So you can? Okay.
Yeah, the problem is that very often there's nobody coming.
Doesn't happen, yeah.
And you wait and you wait and you wait, and then you just go and you just wasted an hour. But certainly.
It's one of those things where you don't do it in good faith. You need somebody on the phone telling you, I am on my way. You have to say, okay, well, this is where I'm at. How soon can you be here? 10 minutes? Okay, we can make that work. And if not, then it goes EC or wherever it needs to go.
Yeah, you need to be here in 10 minutes. I am waiting 10 minutes, and then we're on our way. Okay, I'm going. I'm coming. I'll be there in 8.
Speeding.
Okay. So I put myself in the queue. I think one of the things I think that's come up in the past, and there was back when a lot of like homeless camps were moved out and lots of their items were thrown away. So do you think that this policy is now kind of covering that the officers then know that you just can't, as you take somebody, arrest them for that as they've done in the past, that this kind of helps them understand that you can't just throw out everybody's stuff that may have a camp full of stuff. Is that, because I think that was one of the things that came up when this policy was wanted to be talked about.
Yeah, and the one of the challenges with the homeless camping areas where we've had a large number of camps to clear out, that it was a challenge, and it has also brought to light a policy or a procedure of how to deal with those large amounts of property. And so I certainly think that issue has been through those situations where we had a lot of stuff to deal with. That practice has been dialed in pretty well to where there's no question about that at this point.
Good. Bob?
Yeah, I was reading something about Portland Police had a policy about that when if a person didn't claim it within a certain amount of time, they disclosed of it. But I don't know what, this probably isn't the place to put it in, but I don't know the policy on how long they would keep a property that had to go to the ECU and not just in the jail locker. But let's say there was a large amount of property at a camp somewhere and the person was arrested. How long does EPD keep the property if they?
My understanding is 30 days.
30 days, okay.
But don't quote me on that.
Well, I'm just wondering if it's in policy somewhere.
Yeah, and that's more of an ECU.
Okay.
That's more of an ECU specific, since they're the ones that deal with the discharging of property. So the jail lockers, the custody is provided with on their sheet. They're provided with a locker number and a combo, and they're allowed into the jail locker area, and then they retrieve their property on their own. The ECU staff go in weekly and remove property from the lockers that are beyond that window. Beyond, I believe, the 30 days is how long it's held there, and then what they do with it exactly, or what that process looks like, I am not familiar with. And then the large collections of property, like Portland is dealing with, Public Works would bundle that stuff up, and then again, it's stored near to ECU, and then again held for a period of time that I believe is no less than 30 days. And that's, Chief, do you recall specifically with?
No, but there was a higher court decision that gave us guidance on what's required when we come into possession of found or abandoned property, and which is where this normally occurs. In our Parks and Open Space Department follows the same policy. It's the same guiding court decision. So that's usually where it happens. And I think during the course of an arrest, then the officer and the person being arrested come to an understanding about what belongs to them and what doesn't. And Kyle and Chris will probably tell you more about what happens next. But we seize property from somebody, it has their name on it, it goes into the evidence control unit, and the person who's arrested has a receipt. They're told where they can go, and our evidence control unit staff work with people who are homeless all the time and return their backpacks and their tents and sleeping bags to them all the time. If for some reason they don't pick it up, then yeah, there's a disposal timeline. I don't know exactly what it is, but it complies with the court decision.
Anybody have anything else? Any other questions for? Have any other comments on this? Do we want to see this come back with our few suggestions and changes at a future meeting to work those?
I'll move we table it until the next meeting so that they can make the changes that were recommended or suggestions.
Second.
Technically be 2 meetings since we don't have.
But we don't.
Because we're doing
CRP.
Oh, that's right.
So
Okay, then till December.
I'll second.
Okay. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Aye.
Passes. Carried. So,
Is that in favor or
welcome, Marty, for joining us.
Thanks, sorry I got a delayed flight.
Oh, name tag, next.
So we are running a little behind on our schedule now. That was a great discussion we had on those two. So let's just take a 5-minute break if that's okay with everybody, and then we'll come back and talk about medical aid systems. Remember the cameras are on?
Do we have another copy of that medical aid? Excuse me.
Thanks, Scott.
Can't stop it. After the rest.
Oh, really?
Jessica, sorry about the alarm going off.
What alarm?
Those alarms. We don't.
Oh, I didn't notice. I'm so oblivious. I was lucky I saw your motorcycles.
Wait, is he totally gone? Oh, he's totally
He's got a plus 4.
I've never heard of
be less welcome.
That's true.
Yeah.
Put a damper on.
Right.
Sure. What I expect is that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I don't know. His daughter just hit freshman year, so I think they're playing probably helping her out.
Wow. Really?
Yeah.
I think when you said you sat down, I had to reach the roof on the 2 points. It's not reasonable. You know, administrative credit. I have the same thing. I got to do something.
He went out to the yard. So weird realization that
That would be, especially during the day, because
But are they going to play that show?
30 years. Especially
They'll get another.
transition from violent crime, hoping that's to teachers hitting
This?
Really?
Yeah. Twice. So, once I was sick, once I
So how have you been?
How about yourself?
Good, busy.
I
Yeah.
don't know why everything seems to be so much busier down like.
That's magic. I think it's everyone getting ready, knowing the holidays are coming, and they're like, well, I want to slack off some Thanksgiving and New Year's, so.
Everybody's out rushing to do their stuff.
Exactly. They're like, I gotta get this done.
Y'all can deal with that.
They've got their like year-end goals they gotta meet now. They're like, oh crap, I gotta meet.
I took this from him.
Easy weeks to run Christmas.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, I already gave him one.
Okay, oh.
I had him marked.
Well, it just seems like weird stuff's been
Somebody else
happening
has
the
their
past
own.
2 weeks too. I don't know if it's been your experience, but it's been a weird week for us.
Well, I just think there's a lot of craziness in the air. And that was very funny. Is this clown?
This clown stuff?
Yeah, with music. We had to get everybody all excited about
I'm glad that one boiled over pretty quick. I started seeing news headlines about clowns. I was like, this can't actually, like, this has got to be stopped. I think I blame the election. Everyone's going crazy.
There's probably a lot to that.
Just under 4 weeks out. Wow. Thank goodness.
That's kind of what I figured. I just had to back up.
Ballot should be out soon. So that's good news. Ballot should be out soon. So that's good news.
I have a question.
Get it in. Have you quit calling me.
So I think you said that ECB goes to jail and every week that he taking stuff that's been obstructed. But what if a person has been in jail?
Okay, everyone, shall we get started again? So
That's taken into consideration.
we can get out of here on time.
And how that works.
So let's get started. Talk about medical aid to suspects. And Sergeant, we'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, so the last meeting we talked with rendering medical aid. We keep tagging on the suspect part to it. And as I was looking at it, it just seemed more appropriate that the reality is that we want officers to render aid, period, if it's needed and they're in a place. So I did cut that off. I left it pretty simple to just rendering medical aid because it can be any variety of things, and it may not be an emergency, but if it's practical and applicable for an officer to help somebody with a Band-Aid, then why not? So leaving it fairly simple. We'll go back to the question and answer a little bit there. So we covered, you all have the Portland policy, and we covered the liability. But there was a question about taser, and there is a section 309.5 in the taser policy, and that's titled aftercare. And I just printed off just that one section here. And EMS will be summoned to examine individuals who have been subject to the electric discharge of a taser and or struck by taser probes. A little further down, officers who are trained to do so may remove the metal probes from a person struck with the taser probes unless they request them to be removed by a medical professional, or if the probes are struck, if they're struck in a sensitive area, then they should be removed by a medical professional. And then any person who has been subjected to the electric discharge of a taser and or struck by a taser probe will be medically assessed prior to being booked at a correctional facility. So then I took the Portland policy and I spoke with our training coordinator to verify the training that we have versus the training that they have in there, and then I essentially just sort of retooled it a little bit. Again, it's super short and simple, but that's kind of the goal, is to make it just short and simple so that we don't have to wade through it to figure out what the expectation is. 3.43.1, this procedure establishes procedures and expectations regarding the administration of medical aid by police employees. Again, with this to cover community service officers, animal welfare officers, records staff. It really is about police employees and not just police officers. And so then the next section, 343.2, employee responsibility, talks about employees of the police department will administer medical aid when confronted with another person experiencing a medical problem up to the level they have been trained and equipped. Employees will follow training and safety protocols in the administration of aid. And primary considerations, employees will provide emergency medical aid to ill or injured persons if the employee has completed an approved first aid course within the past 2 years and the employee holds a valid CPR certification. And so those are the two things that we are required to train police officers with as part of their certification, and other employees may be trained in those as well as through their, depending on what their job roles are. And then the infield considerations are specific to police. Police officers will provide medical aid pursuant to the prior section, following the following conditions have been met. And again, this is for the officer safety component. Primary police duties have been accomplished. Any immediate danger has been neutralized. Dangerous subjects have been apprehended or fled the immediate area. or required emergency medical assistance has been requested by phone or radio at the earliest time feasible. So that would be calling for medics on your radio, or a phone if you don't have radio coverage.
And I'll start a queue for this one too, so Scott. Go ahead, Scott.
On A, on the primary police duties have been accomplished as being the first one there. Can you define that a little bit more? What does that mean? What's the scope there? I know that it says the Portland has B first. Basically, it's 3. It's B through D. So I didn't know why A was added in there, or what we were trying to accomplish there.
I wouldn't put them in any order of significance. It really is just a list, not a list of priority. Exactly. They're all of these things are important, and they all need to be met before, in one way or another, before things are done. That's more of a catch-all for. Because every circumstance is a little bit different. It's hard to account for. Not every situation is just going to be the neutralization of the threat or the danger, but it's going to be the potential of making the scene safe. It could be that there's a down power line, or there's a car that's rolled over, or there's something else happening that the scene needs to be rendered safe. And so, since our duties can encompass a million different things, just a catch-all that says that the officer will do whatever is emergently necessary to ensure their safety, essentially, whatever that duty may be.
Will?
Does this apply only while people are on the job?
Yes.
Is that true of police officers as well?
Yeah.
Only while they're in uniform?
Yeah.
Okay.
Anything else? Okay, I put myself in the queue. The one thing, two questions, I guess. One question with that. First of all, this is called a procedure, not a policy.
Correct.
And so this is more for the procedures to follow, not a policy. Right. Second, I guess as we had our discussion last month, to me, what this represents is making sure that officers or police employees know that even if it's the person is hurt by the officer or shot, that we should render aid to him. And I didn't know if there's a way of putting that in the policy to make that clear, because I think that's important for the public, as long as, as the officers read this, that, this means that even if it's something that happened. And I think we had an example recently where a person was shot by an officer here, and they rendered aid immediately, and he survived. And so hopefully that was one of the reasons why, and I think that's important in that. And so is that, and I'm throwing it out at kind of, is there a way to put that in? I understand why you're trying to keep it generic to anybody, but I also want to make sure it's clear to the public that means that one step further.
I just hate to be redundant, being that we have the section in the use of force where if we cause injury in the use of force, that we're required to render aid.
Okay.
And so, without having the same language in two places, and where it's important to have it in the use of force policy, that would be the reason. That was my reason for leaving this broad and not going specifically into one section or the other, because like the taser policy notes the type of aid that you render. If somebody's been tasered, we want to have a policy that the supervisor or the officer can pull up and be able to see all of their responsibilities and not have to try to remember, I should look here and then I need to look there to try to figure out how to figure out what to do. So we have medical aid instructions in our OC policy, in the taser policy, in the use of force policy that are specific to those things that may cause injury. So that was the reason.
Okay.
Or my thinking behind it.
That's good to know. I think that would be important to make sure that that's known, that is in that policy, that it is required for officers to render the aid. So, good. So, Steve?
So I'm looking at the A, B, C, and D under 34322. And I see, like immediate danger, neutralized, dangerous subjects, those are all urgent priority. The first one leaves me just hanging a little bit. Primary police duties have been accomplished. That really is way broad. I mean, it's not necessarily assessed against some priority. I mean, if somebody needs medical aid, maybe not all your primary duties. I don't know what that means necessarily. So I'm coming from a place of ignorance, but maybe there are some duties that you would set aside to render aid. Or what is primary? I mean, I'm back on what you were saying. I'm feeling it's a little ambiguous for me as somebody viewing this, especially in where there's medical assistance that's needed. I'm struggling with that one, I guess, a little bit. Okay, no help. Okay.
Well, again, it's allowing. The goal here is to say that we will render aid, but that officers need to be able to make themselves in the scene safe, and perhaps we need to modify that language something to that degree where, depending on what the level of aid is, this could be the level of aid could be something minor or it could be something major. And if it's minor, then the police duties may be dealing with something else first, or it may be that the primary duty required on that scene is putting a tourniquet on somebody's leg. So it depends, because this is not about the dying person that's just been hit by a train. This is could be anything from somebody experiencing a medical problem. It's not even a medical emergency. So it could be somebody asking, like I said before, for a Band-Aid, where that may be lower on the priority level. And so,
because I know, in like severe injuries, time is precious.
Certainly.
And so, like the person that was shot in Portland, for example, rendering aid immediately, there probably were other duties that need to be done. I'd hate to have an officer be confused about, well, I was doing this, and so the delay, could be substantial, could cause substantial additional harm.
and in the instance of us using force, I believe it's, I'd have to read the specific language, but it's fairly specific that as soon as practical, that aid is rendered. One of those primary duties, if we're in a deadly force confrontation, it's likely and expected that the subject's still going to be handcuffed until we're able to. So one of those primary duties is handcuffing the person and then figuring out what we need to do to help them to make sure that the scene is safe. The problem is this is one of those that could stretch on again for 2 or 3 pages, where we break down a minor emergency or a major emergency, and so trying to strike that balance. But certainly it could be tightened up to talk about making sure a scene is safe. Again, it just depends on the type of emergency. I mean, do we want to focus on major medical emergencies where we say that needs to be placed at a higher priority than basic police stuff, or do we try to make it more broad so that it covers everything?
Well, I think like scene is safe, for example, that's pretty clear. And it's clear, it's not ambiguous. I mean, that says a lot. So maybe there is some clarity in the language. Because I don't want you to, I'm not saying you need to have 5 pages to define every scenario. It's impossible. One officer would have to do that. But to the extent that this can be maybe clarified, tightened up a little bit, would be great.
Okay. The other side, again, for a more minor emergency, or not even emergency, for a more minor request, I hate to even... It's difficult to try to define at what level we're going to make an officer decide that the medical need is more important than something else. Because it certainly could be that a request is put off until you're completely done with the call, because it's somebody that's not involved and it's very minor. So even making the scene safe. I hate to put our officers in a position where the policy says you will render aid if the scene is safe, when it could be somebody that's not involved that's coming over and asking for help. where you're not going to deal with them first if it's asking for a Band-Aid for a cut finger or a scraped knee that is by no means a risk to their life or whatnot. Where us providing something would be purely a public service or a friendly benefit to them.
Can I just jump in for a second? I think I might be able to bring a little help the conversation. We had a incident last year, I think, where one man walked up to the front door of a house and was shot. When the door opened, the man inside the house shot him. Officers responded. They saw that a guy was down. He'd been injured seriously. He might be dying. Officers risked their lives to go up, grab the injured guy, carry him to safety, while one officer guarded them, with them. And that's what we expect. We expect our officers to take reasonable risks to save lives. And what it feels like what's missing from this version of the policy is the guidance that says our fundamental duty is to preserve life. And perhaps somewhere in the purpose and scope, we should have that. And it should be stated in a way that says, above all else, as you read through this guidance, preserve life, including our lives, the lives of innocent bystanders. So, for example, if I missed my CPR certification 4 months ago and somebody's having a heart attack and it's safe for me to do it, I should give them CPR. I shouldn't have a policy that says I'm violating it if I give them CPR. The policy should allow for that.
Right.
So I'm glad you're bringing these up because we need to compose these in a way that says we're here to save lives. That's why we're here. Mm-hmm. And we shouldn't be designing policies that neglect to, direct us in that way. So I think if we do that, and then if we change 3.43.2.1, those two, to state them in the affirmative, I think our firearms policy does this. It doesn't say you don't use your firearm unless you qualified a year ago. It says all officers are required to qualify with their firearm every, whatever it is, twice a year. So this would say all employees must complete first aid training every 2 years, must complete it doesn't say don't help people if you don't have it. It should say help people and you're required to do these two things also. And the primary police duties, without the guidance that says, number one, save lives, that does kind of feel a little uncomfortable.
I think that's really helpful because I'm not talking about the Band-Aid, right? But these in A or B, C, and D talk about more of the saved lives, the dangerous, because I doubt you're going to have a dangerous situation if somebody needs a Band-Aid for a scrape on the knee. It's possible, I guess, but you wouldn't necessarily expect that, right? Yeah. But so, like, your saved lives feels like that's in the tone here of some of these objectives, so that would be really helpful.
Yeah, I think so, too.
So I have Bob and then Edward. Bob?
Yeah, as I read this, I think about the different possibilities involved when you use the word medical problem, which could range the gamut from somebody who's just ill and doesn't feel well all the way up to a person who's dying, and you have no idea what's wrong with them. And that's why I'm glad that you have added in there up to the level of they've been trained to. I'm not a trauma surgeon either, so if I come across somebody who's been shot or injured really badly as a police officer, I don't see how, anybody can be asking somebody to handle it, other than the immediate first aid issues which you cover later on here, and the fact that you know first aid, you know what you put pressure on the wound, that kind of thing. So all the protocols that you try to put in place for this are confounded by what I would say is a use of common sense. And to talk about, whether police duties have been performed first is not quite descriptive of what they're trying to get at here. I'm sure what the policy wants to say is make sure the scene is safe, make sure that the person gets the proper aid they need, and get an ambulance on the way to take care of anything that's more serious. So you've got the different categories. You've got illness and mental illness, and then you've got serious trauma, and you're not equipped for that, so you need to get an ambulance there quickly to get them to a hospital, get them evacuated, those kind of issues. With this particular policy, I think you have to have something in there to allow the common sense of the officer to be able to judge the situation. Because if you look down at C, it says until they've been apprehended or fled the immediate area. So when we talk about if you got 2 or 3 subjects that are shooting guns or whatever and causing problems, and one guy goes around the back of the building, is the area secure? Or have you got to worry about, if you're alone, have you got to worry about this guy coming back at you while you're trying to render first aid? Every situation should be judged on its merits, and that's where I take an exception to what happens sometimes, is because we look at one incident and we get this knee-jerk reaction to it, and we want to change everything to fit this bad incident that happened. So somebody saw a police officer not render aid immediately, so now we've got to have all police officers conscious about rendering aid immediately, and that's great, but there are situations where that can't happen. I mean, just common sense tells you it's not safe to do that right now, and I don't think you can, require an officer to give aid unless you give that latitude. So what I'm asking for is allowing some common sense to be in the policy, to allow the officer some latitude to use his own judgment, his or her own judgment, to be able to decide when it's safe to render aid. And I hope a sense of this. Preserving life is fine. That's a good goal, but also the safety of officer and the rest of the public around the area. If you've got a volatile scene and you're not doing your job by protecting the citizens around there, while you're working on this person who's been injured, you may be neglectful of other people as well. So there's a lot to be considered, and there's a lot of things that have to come into play. Thank you.
So I'm making an assumption that we probably teach police officers through their training kind of how to assess a situation and determine the most pressing need that they need to address. Sometimes there is an immediate public safety need. Sometimes there's a health need. The example the chief used, the officers assessed the situation and saw the most immediate need was to get the person who'd been shot and then apprehend the suspect, or at least that's the way I heard the story. And it seems like that training is not quite consistent with the policy that's proposed, because the policy says first, achieve primary duties, second, neutralize any immediate danger, and it doesn't leave the room for that kind of reasonable judgment consistent with training. So I wonder, is there a way to kind of encapsulate that in some sort of statement that says, it's very similar to what Bob was suggesting, that says, use reasonable judgment consistent with training and existing departmental policy to determine when to render aid, something of that nature? Would that get closer to what the intent of the policy is?
Well, this is a policy that you're helping us craft. So.
Yeah.
It's whatever you want. For your draft, it's whatever you want the intent to be.
Can I say something?
Yes.
I think maybe it's unfortunate, but this policy or this procedure is a catch-all, like we said, the discussion of Band-Aids to gunshots. And you're right. There's always your priorities, and it's constantly evolving. And for me, as a police officer, I understand what Mr. McIntyre said were your concerns with saying that these primary police duties have been accomplished. But for me, my duties, all of this is inside of that description. My primary duties are constantly evolving, and my priorities are shifting and changing. And the guy that's has a bunch of bullet holes in him, we're going to try to take him to a safe area. Obviously, we don't know where the suspect is. We have no idea where he is. So we have, to an extent, a duty to. We do put ourselves at risk. I guess I just wanted to clarify that when I read this, I don't read that the very first and foremost thing that I need to consider is that the quote-unquote primary police duties have been accomplished. There's, like I said, it's constantly evolving, and you do have to be aware of your threats and dangers and all that. But our priority is always to try and help and try to save people when at all possible.
all of that into a policy.
Yeah.
Which is the tough part.
Well, you've given us some things to think about. I
Yeah.
think we can go back to the drawing board and adjust a couple things. I really appreciate you pulling this together, Kyle.
Yeah.
Out of scratch.
It's a great start. Anybody have any other questions or comments or on the policy?
I was just thinking, if you like this wording for whatever reasons, the primary police duties have been accomplished, if it were last, it wouldn't, I think some of the objection is that this is the first thing and it's, kind of ambiguous or wide open or whatever.
I'm not married
so
to anything.
If it were the last thing, that's, if this were a list of priorities, immediate danger, dangerous subjects, emergency medicals, and then the primary police duties have been accomplished. If all of those things are done, then that is done.
Or would it really make the commission feel better if there specifically was a part for emergency medical need versus everything else? I mean, is it too difficult to try to make it broad and specific at the same time, or should there just be a separate section that? Again, it's so hard because I come up with 100 different scenarios. Even hearing it come out of my mouth, I come up with 100 different scenarios. And it's like, well, that doesn't work either because we don't want to shoehorn officers into having to do something by forcing them to violate the policy because it's not the right thing to do at that time. So,
That's a good question.
Well, I think like the chief had some great comments about, like I'm not going to worry if I've missed my last CPR training if somebody needs CPR. I know how to do it. I'm going to do it. So, like there should be allowances. Like this policy shouldn't be so strict that you would be prohibited from providing aid because of something like that. Let's Chuck. Let's Chuck. I don't have an answer for you.
Do you want us to bring this back?
Yeah, I think we'd like to see your work on it, Sergeant.
You don't just trust me to take everything you said and make it happen?
No, we trust you, but I just like to see how you wrote it because I think it's going to be very good.
I haven't marinated. I'll probably send you some more. Like some sauce, some other sauce, once I kind of marinate it.
We'll bring it back in December and then January and then maybe again in February. Maybe at that point we will have figured out how to
We'll keep it under
weave this all together.
We should bring in all the life-saving commendations that, so you can see examples of what it looks like in practice, and maybe we'll see how policy can be modeled to support what's already happening.
I've gotten 2 of those actually.
Okay, so let's move on, and our next topic is the joint CRB commission meeting in November. If anybody has topics that we want to bring up or have on the agenda for that meeting?
Yes. Let me get to my note here. That case that I think was actually spoke of tonight, the CRB would like to talk about the Charlotte case, that incident to jail. That might be interesting.
Anybody have anything else? Other topics specifically we want to bring, or we'll just we'll put together an agenda? I was just looking for if there's anything specific we want to talk about with the CRB or discuss why the CRB is with us at the table. Okay. And the mayor-elect will be there at the same time for this. So.
Is there like a little discussion about each other, like the CRB's roles and the commission's role, how policy and so on? I mean, like, is there a little, maybe a kind of like
That'd be good.
opportunity to learn a little bit about each other's charges or whatever? I mean, is that part of the?
That's what we're asking now.
Yeah, that's what you guys.
Yeah, I mean, I know this happens like every other year or something like that, but I think that'd probably be good.
Okay. Anything else for anybody?
Is there any value, maybe this happens already, and I just don't have the experience to know that yet, but is there any way that we, share with each other our work plans and kind of know what's coming over the next while so that we can really be using our commission liaison roles as effectively as possible? Is there any...
We don't. We could bring that up and talk about it at the joint meeting. I think that's one of the things we should, and maybe that's a little bit to make sure that the liaisons are being used as effectively as we can between both commissions that we have. So we definitely can talk about that too. Okay. Anything else? Perfect. So the next item is everyday concerns and emerging issues. If we have anything that we want to. Okay.
So this is an item that was from your work plan. There were two separate items, everyday concerns and emerging issues. And now that we are however many months away from the end of this work plan, the question is, is there something that you want to make sure we add, because come May, we're going to be starting our next 2-year planning cycle and 2-year work plan. So if there's anything in the emerging issues or everyday concerns that hasn't been addressed, we have 6 months left to figure it out. So this is just an opportunity to sort of circle the wagons and make sure that if there is something that we want to include, that we get it added.
Okay.
So I'm pretty confident that the way it worked before works pretty good, and that is the chairman check with Carter and maybe work out the issues that haven't been addressed and bring it up on the agenda. That seems to work well. I don't see us missing anything because of that. So. Okay.
Okay. Anybody else? Chief, you don't have anything that's of concern, but these days that we want to look at sooner than maybe. Put you on the spot. Sorry about
No, well, the exercise we're going to be going through right now, I'll talk about more during my report, but we'll be evaluating our efforts for creating better safety downtown in the parks here soon. But I don't know how much of a policy matter. I can't think of
anything from your perspective, Officer Mackey?
No, sir.
Okay.
Not this time.
Perfect. Okay. Good. Thanks, everyone. So move on to the chief's report.
All right. That's a pretty thin report. I was out of the office for a couple of weeks this month, so I accomplished this. Something that we started doing, a lot of departments smaller than this one have a chief's interview with finalists before they move on to the next phase of the process. We've never done that here, so a couple of hiring processes ago, I started interviewing candidates after their background, but before the psych and the medical. And it's been a great way for me to connect with them. We end up hiring about half the ones I interview, not because I don't, not because of any decision I make, but in the psych and the medical usually washes out about half the people, half the finalists. But anyway, it's a great way for me to connect. And then I talk with them again in the local academy, and so anyway, it's been a good practice for me. And then I speak at almost every in-service training session, so I did that in September. I did half of them, I think, and Captain Gamcar did the others. I spoke at the graduation at DPSST. We had 7 officers that graduated, and they received a number of awards. I think one of them got the academic award. Another guy got the fitness award. And then the Board of County Commissioners adopted a rule that allowed them to enable the forgiveness of taxes, property taxes on property for spouses whose partner was killed in line of duty. So Senate Bill 1513 this last year allows counties to establish that rule, and ours did it during Public Safety Appreciation Week, so it was pretty neat. Our patrol division had some training for supervisors, so I spent a little time talking with them. The University of Oregon did their community welcome walk. Has anybody here done that? And it's a great deal. There's half of us from the city, half from the University of Oregon. We team up. We go around West University, South University, neighborhood associations areas, and welcome students back to school. A little startling when they see a uniformed police officer. But as soon as we make the introductions, they're grateful. You know, the number of people that participate in the unruly parties there is a pretty small percentage of those that live in the neighborhood. So most of them are really grateful that we're out there reminding everybody to behave well, and then telling them how to protect their property and how they can protect their rights as renters and all those things. So that's good. And then I was on OPB radio talk show. It was a Portland show, but I got to sit here in downtown Eugene to do it. And mostly the subject was safety downtown related to the chronically homeless. So it was a great opportunity to educate people a little bit about what the conditions are for people who are sort of resistant to care and treatment and unable on their own to get out of a lifestyle of homelessness because of their mental health condition or drug or alcohol addiction. And so what we're going to do soon, we're going to be making a presentation to the City Council on the efforts that we've made so far to make downtown safe, and not just the police department, but all city departments and our partners, and what the effect has been and what our plans are for the future and what requests we're going to have of the council. There may be some decisions that they could make that would help. Coincidentally, we've also we've hired a consultant project for public space, PPS. Look them up on the internet if you want to. It's a nonprofit organization that's traveled all over the world helping communities like ours change our public space in a way that radically affects the safety and the usability and economic viability. Have a lot of good examples, good lessons for us, so there's more on that you'll hear in the future. The things we've done this last summer, we enhanced our downtown patrol with a couple of foot patrol officers, and then we also established our downtown for the months of August and September as a hot spot, so officers in their unobligated times were asked to go down there and get out of their cars, walk for patrol, and be a visible presence. We started the community court program with Eugene Municipal Court and service providers this last summer. And the CORT program was a pilot project with the downtown team. This is the one that Jack Ratty mentioned earlier. So we're going to just evaluate all that and see what difference, what worked and what didn't work, and we'll be prepared for next spring and summer. And then the moving Vietnam War Memorial was here. That was a really, I don't know if you were able to go down there, but it was a really moving presence, and there was a lot of good activities around that. A number of us volunteered to stand on a security detail during nighttime hours. And then I'm on the Governor's Commission for Law Enforcement Contacts. This is the Racial Profiling Commission, for lack of a better term. And we met last week, 2 weeks ago now, and we talked about state reporting and reports back to agencies on the outcome of cases, and training, required training for our basic academy, whether or not we should change the mandatory ongoing training for incumbent police officers, and that kind of thing. So that's what the last 2 weeks have been like. And then there's been a few newsy items, and you can look at those. We've got a few things coming up. Mayor Piercy is going to leave office at the end of the year, so we're going to celebrate the time that she's been our mayor. And then a number of police officers are receiving awards from the Oregon Peace Officers Association National Bank or Annual Banquet in November. So I'll be going to that.
Anybody have any questions for the chief?
I have a comment.
Okay.
I happened to be in the car when that interview came on, caught it live from the LCC, and I was real pleased that you were able to get out. They kept wanting to return to the theme of the homeless folks that are and what's going on, but you made some great points in the comments, I think, and also we're able to get the information out about how undermanned our department is compared to other departments in the state and in the country. And I think that drove home the point to how much the police are able to do with certain limitations and so forth. But that was what I caught from it. And I appreciate the fact that every time they asked you a question, you're able to answer with facts. And that really seemed to catch people, I think. I hope it did.
Yeah.
Yes.
Anyone else? Okay. Well, that brings us to our closing comments, and I will start to my left. Scott, any closing comments?
Yes.
Chief?
I do have one thing. In, I think, the January meeting, you have an item on the agenda for us to talk about promotions, evaluations, demotions, and health and well-being. The one item on there that makes me really uncomfortable is the subject of demotions, because they're very uncommon. So when we talk about demotions, it'll be really difficult to do that. We either have to be so generic it's not very helpful at all, or we have to give enough detail that it wouldn't be hard to figure out what we're talking about. What I'd like to do instead is have HR come in, some HR folks come in and talk about our practices around discipline, which would include demotion. And I think it'll give you an understanding. I think it might have been you, Steve, who brought this up. So I know that may not be exactly what you were looking for, but if we have to stick with that demotion topic, it's going to be very generic.
So you're thinking about, are you thinking about bifurcating, like addressing them, but in a different setting, like HR, just talking about that specifically and uncoupling it from the promotion process and the...
Well, discipline ranges, corrective action, essentially what's known as discipline ranges from coaching to documented counseling, oral reprimand, written reprimand, both of which are written, by the way. And then suspensions and termination and demotion is in there too. All of those require a standard of due process and just cause. So I think you might gain more by hearing how discipline is administered and knowing that demotion is among the disciplinary measures that we use.
But it wouldn't be at the expense of the other two items on that?
No. You mean promotion?
Yeah, that's why I was asking. You want to uncouple that from the promotion?
Yeah, we can talk about all those. I'd just rather talk about discipline instead of demotion.
Okay.
Okay. That's what I do. Thanks.
Okay. Terry, anything?
Nope, good.
No, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Welcome. Thanks. I'm good.
Thanks.
Bob?
Oh, I'm like a broken record. I'm going to come here and say something every meeting about that. Last week, I was down there and had a Code 3 response, 2 huge crowds. It looked like a near riot to me. They were screaming and dogs were barking, and it was just, shirts came off, and it was all in. And we had a couple of units respond, and they seemed to break it up pretty quickly. But the point being, it's again, I stop what I'm doing, stop watching that, and I start looking at people passing by on the sidewalk in front of the courthouse. And I remember, some of us do remember, when people took their lunch and they sat in the park blocks and ate their lunch peacefully on their lunch hour. You can't do that anymore. I mean, I understand, we've got to have rights for people to do what they want, but when they misbehave, something has to happen. There has to be consequences. So I'm going to keep talking about it. It's just, it seems that every time I think, well, it's settling down now, something else happens that makes, not just me, I hear it from business people, because I do some volunteer work downtown, cleaning up graffiti, and I've talked to business people, and they worry. They worry about the crowds and what they do and how they, it's a natural subject that devolves away from the graffiti. They talk about the misbehavior downtown and how it drives away their customers, and they're worried about it. So I think it's a valid point for us to, consider what kind of policies can help us manage that problem down there. The chief is working on, I'm sure, and so is the city council, but we really need to have some input on that if we can. Thank you.
I just want to thank everybody that came tonight to talk. Thank Officer Mackey for joining us, giving his input. So with that, everybody have a good evening. The meeting's adjourned. Oh, and a reminder, the next meeting is on Wednesday, the 9th of November. So a little change of date. Because it's holiday.
Yeah, yes.
You live downtown?
I was.
No.